Hey, it is Wednesday, March 4th, 2026. We are joined you're watching Direct Line. We are joined with our special guest, Chris Burnett, candidate for United States House Representatives, Maryland District 6. I've had too much coffee today. Our host tonight are Mark Unkefer and the hostess with the mostest, Jackie Saxton. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Dwight. All right. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I don't think we need to go through introductions. I feel like everyone probably knows who you are at this point. It's not your first time on the show. So we'll jump right into, what's going on and the issues. So let's start with talking about the innovation corridor. I know that's a big point of trying to bring spark some life back into the county and hopefully, stop driving away so much business from Maryland. So what's your take on what's going on there?
Well, that is an uphill battle to make Maryland a business-friendly state. So I have been pushing what I've been calling the innovation corridor. And this was my effort to demonstrate value as I'm pivoting away from running on my military record and what that brings to a congressional district, and then looking at how we can address the Democrat-created affordability crisis. Affordability means something different to everyone. So it's not something that you can necessarily quantify, but that it is a pain that we all feel. And that really the best way to address affordability is to create opportunity. So whether you're fixed income or you're a family trying to start out or a young person trying to get a job in the region, we need more opportunity. And whenever you're looking at it from a congressional district standpoint, you're somewhat limited as to what you can do other than to try to influence state and county level decision making. So at the heart of the innovation corridor, it's trying to align the needs of Congressional District 6 with the interests of local residents with national security priorities. And what I mean by that is the AI economy has arrived, and the AI economy is going to be energy intensive. Maryland has failed to set the conditions for Marylanders to thrive, even in general. We can't even provide residential electrical surplus at an affordable and reliable way. So not only are we failed to provide basic necessities to the residents, we're in no position to compete in the AI economy. So the way I've structured the innovation corridor is looking at infrastructure, energy, and jobs. And to break that down a little further, the infrastructure is everything from funding for the American Legion Bridge, which is the gateway to Western Maryland, expanding 270, looking at the I-70 interchange and corridor for existing industrial and commercial sites for opportunity zones, and then looking at I-68 all the way out to Garrett for opportunity to create either data centers or areas that would support a data center. But with every data center, not only would it have to be in an opportunity zone somewhere along those federal highways, they would be required to have a small modular reactor. We have a small modular reactor developer in Rockville, X-Energy. We have a capability in Maryland that could provide all of the energy needs of a data center, and then any surplus would go to AI and quantum computing research, as well as co-located advanced manufacturing. And that's where the jobs part comes in. There's the construction jobs associated with infrastructure and development, but as we all know, data centers do not produce jobs. They really are these large warehouse type facilities, and there's not a lot of jobs associated with them. And it was interesting is that since I've been pushing the innovation corridor, Wes Moore has come out and basically touted a part of it. And he had said, if you're going to bring in a data center, you also have to include other employment, which in the case of the innovation corridor is advanced manufacturing, and looking at how we could use federal dollars under the CHIPS Act to subsidize or encourage private sector investment in advanced manufacturing. So when you break all of this down, and you're aligning national security priorities, which is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and advanced manufacturing, with the infrastructure we've been asking for, from American Legion Bridge to the Federal Highway Network, and that you put this into a way, you sequence it in a way that the development aligns with local interests. We can look at the Adamstown example in Frederick, where this is where the county saw dollar signs, and they basically rewrote the rules so that this company could come in and basically run roughshod over locals' interest. There was no issues. There was no consideration of energy. There was no consideration of infrastructure and roads. There was no thought of how this was going to impact the local communities, whether it was the water or even just the neighborhood itself. And what you have now is this reaction to try to, as they've described it, build the airplane in flight. The innovation corridor says we're going to set the conditions for growth. We're going to accept the fact that data centers are going to arrive, but we're going to put them in existing industrial commercial zones. We're going to build the infrastructure so that when they arrive, they can be built and not interfere with local residents whatsoever. They're going to provide their own energy source. They're going to be a part of our water and sewer system. And what I mean by that is, if we require that they're going to use water to cool the data center, then they'll do the water treatment of our gray water. In other words, things that are already in the system, instead of it going to a water treatment plant, the water will go to a data center. They'll have to clean the water, use it for cooling purposes, and then be discharged cleaner than it would have been and arrived. So it's not going to affect well water. It's not going to be drawing on our existing utility network. If anything, it's going to augment it. So with all of that, you have the ability to bring in the data centers in a way that are going to be sustainable and they're going to align with local interests. We create jobs in the form of AI and quantum research, as well as advanced manufacturing. And then most importantly, we're going to be producing energy so that we don't have diesel generators, no imminent domain power lines, and most importantly, any surplus will go back into the grid to offset our costs. I know that was a long explanation, but I at least wanted to provide a thumbnail sketch for the rest of the conversation.
So what has been the reaction so far to your ideas?
And you never know, and I've done this presentation in Montgomery County, and I've now done it in Frederick, and it's been extremely well received. And the reason why I think it's been so well received, and I had, I'm a nuclear engineer in Montgomery County, and I've had farmers and local residents in Frederick both come up to me and say, finally, somebody is putting together a plan that makes sense. And then it's not just a pie in the sky, hey, this would be great if we had data centers and all these other attachments. It's taking national security priorities, knowing that that's going to drive federal investment. And then you're looking at existing pots of money, whether it's the federal highway funds, the CHIPS Act, the Investment in Infrastructure Act. This should not have to raise taxes. This should not impose a burden in any way. It's just aligning interests around national security priorities and the needs of Western Maryland. And whenever you put all this together and you sequence it, you realize that this is just a matter of planning. And then when you establish it as an innovation corridor and you designate it as having a certain set of rules, now private investment can flow. Because if you're on the private side of this, the biggest concern you have is that you're going to be met with litigation or you're going to be met with opposition. If we can take care of the infrastructure and we can ensure that the opportunity zone is designated and ready for them to build, they can make a multi-billion-dollar investment knowing that there's not going to be lawsuits, there's not going to be opposition, and that every time the municipal government turns over, they're going to change the rules. So this has been very well received, and I was a little surprised by that. I was expecting some tough questions, and I've had those, but for the most part, it's been very well received, and I think people like the fact that it creates strategic growth for the foreseeable future and sets the conditions for prosperity in the AI economy.
So you mentioned that, Westmore seemed to be picking up bits and pieces of it and trying to take some credit for it. Have you noticed any other Democrat support for it?
No,
Not
and in
so
fact, Delaney, once again, she seems to be on the wrong side of every 80-20 issue. She's come out in opposition to data centers, which again is she seems to stand in opposition to the growth and opportunity that's needed. Data centers, if not properly managed, can be destructive. Data centers, if not properly planned for, are going to be a burden. But like any other emerging industry, especially one that supports national security priorities, there's an incredible opportunity here, but we just have to plan for it. We have to take into account that there are valid local health, safety, and environmental concerns. You simply set those conditions so that once those have been met, local residents get the benefit of this and they're not getting the burden of poor planning. And we see that every day in Maryland, whether it's the taxes and fees and the poor planning when it comes to a vanity project like the solar fields or the wind farms. We have failed to plan, and the failure to plan, and I say we, I mean the state of Maryland, has failed to set the conditions for Marylanders to prosper.
And there was a very interesting press conference with the Trump admin today specifically about that. And it was with all the major AI and tech companies. And they were signing on basically to a commitment saying, hey, yes, like we want to win the AI race. We want to get ahead on this. We want to build these data centers, but we commit to also building the infrastructure and bringing in the power so that that burden of the rising electric bill, something that's very prevalent in the state of Maryland
Yes.
right now, is not passed on to the consumers.
So I published my innovation corridor on December 15th of last year. This has now certainly taken on a national level of interest. And I think, when you start looking at this problem, it becomes clear that the long pole in the tent was, of course, energy production. So the fact that I published this in December and you're now starting to hear it at the State of the Union by President Trump, that you heard it today with tech industry leaders aligning to it and saying, yes, we want to produce the energy. And then you have the Department of Energy also getting behind nuclear and looking at ways to expedite permitting and licensing to get these things fielded. And the small modular reactor is an incredible technology. This is not the giant cooling towers of 3 Mile Island or other visuals that people have when they think of nuclear. These small modular reactors are the size of a tractor trailer, and they're designed in such a way that it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, for it to have a meltdown or to have a major accident. And the way a lot of the fuels are developed in this day and age, there's only a very limited amount of nuclear waste that can be very easily contained and stored in a way that is actually safer and less of an environmental impact than coal, oil, or in some cases, the means and methods that are needed to create solar and wind farms. So it's just, I think, taking advantage of the second half of the Trump presidency to set the conditions in Maryland for prosperity in the AI economy is really a no-brainer. And as I present this and share it, it's gaining a lot of momentum.
So much of the focus has been on the proposed data center in Frederick County. And this is obviously, I think, sort of a way of addressing people's concern, but also moving forward with the proposal. So I guess what I'm hearing is you would support the Adamstown data center provided the conditions were set that made it more palatable to the community.
Well, my concern is at this point, that ship has sailed and there's very little we can do other than
okay.
I've encouraged people to sign the petition to get this on to the ballot. I've said, people, if you're concerned, sign the petition, do the steps that can be done at the county level to address your concerns. At the federal level, what I can do as a congressman is look at national security priorities and then look at the power of the purse. And then if I can get money directed in the form of federal highway funds, the CHIPS Act, and other sources of federal funding, I can set the conditions for county and state level either investment or county and state level revisiting. What I mean by that is deregulate and say, look, Maryland or County X, you have to revisit what has prevented growth, that has prevented good strategic planning. If you can align to the innovation corridor, then we can ensure that the money will be there for the infrastructure. We can ensure that the Department of Energy will expedite the small modular reactor process. And then most importantly, we will collectively set the conditions for private investment, which will ultimately transform the Western Maryland economy without transforming the landscape. I don't think a single inch of farmland should be affected by this. Use existing industrial and commercial sites. There are no power lines that will be imposed by eminent domain. No diesel generators spewing exhaust as an emergency or secondary power. If we do this the right way, we could truly transform Western Maryland and have prosperity for the foreseeable future while we're contributing to national security priorities.
All right. Well, so let's pivot a little bit more away from that. There's obviously you have a military background. There's a whole lot going on in the world right now with the strikes in Iran. And you had the vote today on the War Powers Act. And obviously, we saw that go down in defeat. And the vast majority of Republicans agree that Donald Trump had the authority to do what he did. Where do you stand on that? And where do you think is going on with the members of Congress who don't agree with that?
Well, I'll start with, I just retired. I spent 22 years on active duty as a lawyer for the Marine Corps. Over the course of those 22 years, I spent a disproportionate amount of time in the Middle East, particularly on the ground in Iraq. And then during every single one of those 4 deployments on the ground, and the 1 deployment I spent aboard a Marine Expeditionary Unit transiting the Strait of Hormuz and running what's called a trap mission in the region, every single one of those deployments were plagued by the threat of Iranian missiles or Iranian proxies. So I've had the chance all week on the radio and otherwise to talk about my position on this, both from a historic standpoint, the justification for taking the action that we've taken, and then to talk through Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, as well as the War Powers Resolution of 1973. So not only were we justified in taking this action because we were under imminent threat of a missile attack of U.S. forces in the region. I've listened to Democrats who either have not read the Constitution or unfamiliar with the War Powers Resolution, or they simply don't understand national security and foreign policy. I've heard individuals talk about, well, those ballistic missiles cannot reach the United States. We are not under imminent threat. That's either the most absurd misunderstanding of national security and foreign policy, or it's just being willfully ignorant of the fact that we have a significant buildup of U.S. forces that are in the region all the time. Not just the forces we move to the region in case of a contingency. In the contingency here, negotiations broke down. Those forces were in immediate harm's way. We needed to take action to respond to their ability to hit us. And what you have then is the ability to attack in light of an imminent threat. And the way we used to break this down is you don't have to wait to be hit. Once you have intelligence that it is likely that there's going to be a missile attack, there's going to be a drone attack, that there's going to be some kind of a coordinated attack on U.S. forces, you can respond. The only question then is be a matter of military necessity and proportionality. And so when you're looking at a missile arsenal the size of Iran's, and you look at their ability to infiltrate throughout the region to attack with proxies, this has been a proportional response to an immediate threat that U.S. forces were facing. And when I talk about our experience in the area, when I was on the Marine Expeditionary Unit, I was on the 13th MU, I was on the USS Boxer, we had standard escalation of force measures, which meant as you're transiting and you're a warship, if anything even comes near the ship, usually starting at miles out, you have a series of actions that are taken to deter any possible attack. And you go through this continuum, and at approximately a half a mile to 1,000 meters, you start to engage with deadly force because you simply can't risk a ship coming up and sinking $1 billion vessel. When you transit the Strait of Hormuz, you have to tolerate armed attack boats that will come within 200 meters. And we would have to tell Marines that were standing watch to absorb that extra level of risk, not because of any reason other than tolerating Iranian provocation. We had to tolerate that level of saber rattling because it was the Strait of Hormuz and that was Iran. And we've seen what they've done to U.S. forces when they have captured them. The humiliating images we saw of those Navy personnel being captured by Iranian Navy. So the short answer is I've been in support of this whenever it occurred. I think it was absolutely consistent with international and domestic law. And I thought the fact that we were trying to limit any president's ability to respond immediately to a threat is an empty political gesture. And when I saw that it failed today, I was very happy to see that, because you have people that are trying to score cheap political points and putting U.S. forces and U.S. interests at risk.
So what do you see as the path forward for the U.S. military in Iran? Do we need regime change, or can we reach our objectives with something short of regime change?
I think we need to have military objectives and you have political objectives. The mess that we had in Iraq and Afghanistan was we conflated the two. Whenever you achieve military objectives, and that is you eliminate a threat, you eliminate their ability to conduct command and control of any armed force, you should move on. When you find yourself in the role of nation building or policing, that is a difficult position. And that was where we suffered most of our casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. We found ourselves in the role of nation building rather than having achieved our military objectives, withdraw, set the conditions through either a regional or international force to provide peacekeeping, and then let diplomacy and then let international relations work. So here, my hope is that we will be done with all combat operations in 4 to 5 weeks, well within the 60 days of the War Powers Resolution. We would withdraw major combat operations. We will now have set the conditions for a regional force to come in and provide some level of policing or assistance. And then if we can facilitate the process of an election, or however the Iranians want to approach their regime, then we would assist there. But I do not want to see another Iraq, and I do not want to see another Afghanistan. I don't want to see U.S. forces on the ground, quite frankly. we can achieve all of our military objectives through the air, and then we can set the conditions for a regional policing force to go in and provide the assistance for a transitional government in the foreseeable future. And then at that point, militarily, we've completed our job. Diplomacy and international affairs will now step in. And ideally, that'll bring about a peaceable transition on behalf of the Iranian people.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jackie.
No, I was gonna say, I'm trying to think what else is going on in Iran and everything surrounding it, because it's got so many implications with China and everything like that. But Mark, you go. I think of an actual question.
Well, I was going to ask, one of the concerns that has been expressed is whether or not we have very expensive weapon systems, but whether we have enough weapons in order to kind of accomplish all of our objectives in this space. And have we learned something from this conflict with the Ukrainian conflict about the need to have sort of more a greater volume of sort of less expensive weapons, but one that can be scaled to a conflict like this?
Well, I'll start with, I think we've learned some invaluable lessons about the utility of cheap and numerous. It's the World War II example, where our tanks weren't nearly as good as the Germans, but for every one of their pristine tanks, we had 10 American tanks. And that number, that ratio worked. And I think we're seeing in Ukraine that a properly equipped force that is outnumbered, outmatched in every sense of the word, but given the basic tools that are needed to have some kind of an impact, they can be extremely effective. When I hear that we don't have the weaponry to meet all of our objectives, I think that's a bit of a red herring. We do have expensive missile systems. It is very expensive to run 24-hour flight operations, but I could not imagine a scenario where we would run out of munitions. We might fall short of what's on hand, so we would have to conduct a resupply, but we're not in risk of falling short. I think that raises a funding question, and I think that's how Congress tries to be relevant. That if we were to go beyond the 60 days, you would need an authorization for the use of military force. And that is usually the funding to continue combat operations, which oftentimes is procurement and accelerated receiving of ammunition and other requirements. So I do think that we would either have to have a resupply, which could be expensive, or if we go beyond the 60 days, you would need an authorization for the use of military force. But I don't think we're going to run out of missiles.
So one of the other consequences that this action has had in a local perspective is that we're starting to see some of these isolated, but probably going to get more frequent pop-ups of Iranian sleeper cells or people just in the US who decided that they are pro-Ayatollah for some reason, who are starting to commit crimes and acts of terror in the United States. And yet we are still in a partial DHS funding shutdown because
100%.
of ICE, even though ICE is fully funded. So if you were in Congress at this time right now, and we're trying to get the Democrats to the table to be like, hey, look, this is not the time to have the people who are going to be protecting us from these domestic terror threats to not have the funding that they need. So how would you navigate that?
I mean, you nailed it on the head. I was going to point that out, that the fact that we have a partial shutdown of the very people that are tasked with investigating and preventing these types of crimes is absurd. And so I would immediately call to have either partial funding or full funding, and that we can have the discussion about ICE separately. Because as we all know, this is the Democrat temper tantrum that's having zero impact on ICE operations and is only making U.S. citizens less safe. I mean, this is yet another 80-20 issue where the Democrats are on the wrong side of this issue. When it comes to national security, when it comes to the safety of American citizens, there's simply no excuse to have a temper tantrum and not pay the bills that are due, who are of the people who are tasked with doing this. So first and foremost, I would call the Democrats out for what they're doing. And that is, they are putting U.S. interests and U.S. people at risk, which is unacceptable. Then I would immediately move for funding to say, we can have this discussion later. We can call for hearings, but this is not the time to have this discussion. And whenever you start to think about the unnecessary risk that we're assuming and that the source of it, yet again, I can't believe that Democrats get away with this. Somehow this is all, normal course of business for Democrats to be on the wrong side of an issue that puts U.S. citizens at risk, and yet they're not going to be held accountable for it. So I hope they get their act together. I hope they vote on funding, and that the people that are out doing this every single day are able to get paid for the work that they're doing. The last thing I'll say, though, and I've also heard this, is that somehow this action has destabilized the status quo. Well, the status quo wasn't working. We needed to do what we did to stabilize the Middle East. And we need to accept the fact that if that status quo was letting us a threat exist among us, and that we were going to somehow just sort of keep it out of sight, out of mind, and that was a reason not to conduct military operations, that's absolutely the worst possible reason to not act decisively when decisive action is needed.
So let's come back and talk about ICE and the district. As you know, there's a proposal to put an ICE detention facility in the district. It's been controversial. Your Democratic opponents, whoever turns out to be, they've come out against that. What are your thoughts about that?
I would agree. Both Trone and Delaney have come out in staunch opposition to both ICE, essentially supporting Maryland being a sanctuary state, and they've come out in opposition to the federal government purchasing this warehouse. Again, 80-20 issue. They clearly do not know the district. This is welcomed in Congressional District 6. Everybody agrees that we need to effectuate federal law, which means ICE and other federal law agents need the training, equipment, and facilities that are needed to effectuate federal law. If you don't like federal law, change it. Run on changing the law. But this idea that somehow we can pick and choose what federal law we're going to apply, what we're going to ignore, how we're going to try to put our state or our district in opposition to federal law is absurd. This is yet another issue that if they were actually listening to the residents of Congressional District 6, they would realize where there is strong support for ICE, there is strong support for this facility. And then if there is any challenge to that, it would be on making sure that ICE has the training, equipment, and other resources that are needed to do this properly. When you look at the 287G program, this is by far the silliest thing I've ever heard of. This program is intended to take people who've been arrested for non-immigration offenses, somebody who's committed a violent crime, a DUI, an assault, rape. And when they're in custody, those local law enforcement would then run their background check. If they have an active deportation order, they effectuate a transfer from local to ICE. And then that expedites their deportation of an existing deportation order. So what you just saw out of Annapolis was basically severing what was the most efficient, safest, and arguably best possible outcome of somebody who's already in custody for a non-immigration related issue, transferred and having their existing deportation order effectuated without any need to knock on a door, to pull anyone over, to do anything that involves the American public. So again, I don't know why Delaney and Trone are this is their position. It seems like you can't turn on a TV or watch YouTube without seeing a Delaney or Trone ad about their opposition to this. And either they don't know the issue, they don't know the district, or simply they don't care and they're trying to score cheap political points on what they think is controversial. And it's not nearly as controversial as I think they believe.
Well, and we also know that this is something that's like, this is going to be happening whether you want it to or not. Like, we've already seen reports this week that a lot of the stuff that they were using in Minnesota, they are starting to move over here. So they're almost creating. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, what you saw in Minnesota is when you don't work with federal law enforcement, it wasn't as though there was an invasion of ICE and there was a takeover. It was that Minnesota and Minneapolis in particular had become a sanctuary haven. We saw what the effects of that were. And that is the lawlessness, the fraud, and the layers of problems that exist whenever you have a group of people or a region that's living outside of the accountability that we expect in the United States. We're a nation of laws. How you arrive here, how you conduct yourself while you're here, how you participate in our economy and our society, all of those things matter. And somehow there was like a need to give Minneapolis and Minnesota a pass because, well, they care a lot. They're very compassionate. Well, you can be compassionate and you can provide assistance and you can create all of the means and methods that are needed to ensure that lawful asylum seekers are met with the legal support that they need. I say that because my wife arrived here as a political asylee. She left Guinea because they were through a regime change there people were being attacked and killed. She went through the process. She arrived. She was in a political asylee status while she went to school. And over the course of our marriage, she became a naturalized U.S. citizen. So whenever I say this, that we're a nation of laws and that we have a process in place, there are legal definitions as to who is a political asylee, how you can claim it, and how it's adjudicated. To simply suspend them because you feel bad is not how we conduct ourselves in a country that prides itself on being a nation of laws. So the fact that we might see a greater ICE presence in Maryland is not punishment. It is how federal law enforcement has to respond to an area that is ignoring federal law.
Talk about a little bit about the primary, and the perception that I think a lot of people have is that David Trone and April Delaney are moving to the left, or maybe they were always to the left, but now are in a very competitive Democratic primary, which seems to be dominated by Montgomery County. I don't know the full statistics, but that seems to be a large proportion of the Democratic vote. Is this taking them farther away from where the district is as a whole?
100%. They're in a sprint to the left to try to outdo one another. And whether it's the position they've taken on the facility in Washington County, their position in opposition to what we're doing in the Middle East, their position in opposition to really any real growth and opportunity in the region, they're sprinting further and further to the left. And what the left tendency to do is it stifles innovation, it stifles growth, and it wants to create dependency. I start most of my commentary with Congressional District 6 is not for sale. You're talking about two of the wealthiest people to have ever served in the House of Representatives running against each other, trying to distinguish themselves from each other in the most superficial way. There is zero depth to anything they're proposing. It's just exchanging platitudes on who can sound more left, who can align to the most left portion of Montgomery County in particular, and ignoring the rest of the district. My hope is they continue to do this, that they don't have any real substance. They don't have the ability to articulate a plan. Their solution is to either throw their money at a problem or to create some type of federal assistance, which is really federal dependency at the expense of the dignity of people that live in Congressional District 6. People want to work. They want their work to be able to bring home the fruits of those labor and not be reduced to fees, taxes, and regulation. So whenever they start talking about actual opportunity and not federal handouts, when they start talking about ways to actually address affordability outside of them sprinkling a few dollars across the district, then I think people will start paying attention. But their greatest strength, I do believe, is going to become their greatest weakness. They're going to be convinced that they can simply outspend each other and that is enough to win Congressional District 6. Whenever you're running for office, if you're not in this to serve the interests of others, and you're not in this to try to set the conditions for other people to succeed, so whether it's by your ego or it's by your selfish interest to have insider trading access, and you live outside of the district, as they both do, at some point, you're going to be held accountable. You're going to be asked something that you can't throw money at. You're going to be asked a question that you can't just respond with a platitude. You can't just point a finger at the other side. You can't just talk about aspirational goals, but at some point you have to say, how are you going to improve the lives of Western Maryland whenever you appear to not even understand what their needs are?
So there's historically, and sorry, I have a puppy and when he's under the coffee table, it usually means he's chewing on something he's not supposed to. Historically, we have an enthusiasm gap in years where our party is in the White House and it tends to be a referendum on our president. So how do you plan to overcome what could be a significant enthusiasm gap and even some Trump supporters think they're like not happy with Iran and they might not come out either. So how do you plan to get those Republican voters out to the polls that you're going to need to get through?
Well, as you know, I've been at this for a little while now, and I've been trying to meet people where they are. And what I've come up with is you have to get people excited about opportunity. The innovation corridor should cross not only party lines, but it hits people where they care the most, and that is economic opportunity. Looking at ways to put more money in their pocket, to create more opportunity for them and their children, and most importantly, to address their concerns that relate to overdevelopment or poor planning and development that's being jammed down their throat. So my approach is to meet people where they are, answer their concerns, and present them with a solution that they can challenge, a solution that they can disagree with, but a solution nonetheless. And I think part of that sort of that fatigue, so to speak, is that in an interim or a midterm election, oftentimes you're either in favor of or against what they're seeing, and they don't feel like they can effectuate any real change. I'm saying we have an absolute opportunity to effectuate change immediately. And it's aligning national security priorities around the growth that is on its way. There are data centers that are in the works. And that if we don't take steps immediately to align county, state, and federal interest, we're going to find that we're either going to miss out on the AI economy because we can't get out of our own way, or they're going to be imposed upon us in such a way that our quality of life is going to suffer. And when you talk to some of the folks in Adamstown, their lives have been shattered by this, whether it's the heavy construction traffic, whether it's their quality of life and that their well water has been affected by the disruption during construction. The view that they once appreciated of farmland is now a 3-story steel building. The diesel generators that are going to be running intermittently as emergency power within 1,000 meters of a school. This is what poor planning looks like. This is what a Democrat supermajority who has a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of surplus funds and not thinking through what the consequences of those actions are bring us.
So we haven't, we actually talked a little bit about it at the very beginning when we were talking about the innovation corridor, but you touched on transportation issues, and that has been an important one for District 6, and particularly what you mentioned, American Legion Bridge, but also 270. So wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of address those issues.
Of course, you don't have to drive far to see that Virginia did its part. I mean, you go across the American Legion Bridge and you see this massive expanse of highway, and you realize that Maryland failed to do its part. It's been my understanding that we screwed up, quite frankly. The state of Maryland lost $3 or $4 billion that were otherwise available because we couldn't agree on commuter lanes or bike lanes or walking paths. We couldn't get out of our own way to do what was a built-in solution. So one, by giving Wes Moore and what the Democrats want more than anything else, which is property tax revenue from the data centers, what you do then is say, okay, well, first of all, you're going to do it the way we tell you to do it, which is in line with local interests. But second of all, you're going to provide us what you've denied us, and that is the infrastructure that we've demanded. The American Legion Bridge is overdue. Expanding 270 is a no-brainer, certainly all the way up to Frederick. And then when you look at the 70 interchange, there are ways that we can make this entire route much more efficient, much more economically viable. When you start to think about the amount of money that's lost of people sitting in traffic or shipping delays that occur because there's just 2 to 3 hours of traffic there, we could enhance the local economy, improve the quality of life, address the infrastructure issues that will set the conditions for growth. And then while we're doing that, look for those opportunity zones along those federal highways to put data centers or a data center campus in place that will then set conditions for AI and quantum computing research, as well as advanced manufacturing for those long-term job opportunities. So when I look at this plan, this is a way to lead on an issue that will require county and state level agreement. And so when I've been doing these presentations, I invite county and state candidates to come out and speak to their economic development plans. So last night in Frederick, I gave my innovation corridor overview, and then I had 5 local candidates talk about what they would do at the county level and how they would align county interest to this level of deliberate planning. We did the same thing in Montgomery County, and I'll be providing an innovation corridor town hall in Allegheny and Garrett later this month. And then at the end of this month, we'll be doing a similar event up in Washington County as well.
Awesome. Well, that kind of leads us nicely into our last few minutes of the show where we go into plugs, and you've already started with what events you have coming up. So what else, where can people find you? Where can people go to get involved with your campaign?
Well, I appreciate that because we're now very much in a sprint to the primary. So BurnettForCongress.com is always the place to start for signing up for our newsletter, to volunteer, or to donate. Tomorrow night we'll be at Hidden Hills Winery up in Frederick. We're doing a fundraiser. That discussion will primarily be national security and foreign policy. So it'll be heavy on Iran, but I will align that with the innovation corridor to say how national security and foreign policy also can have an impact locally. So that presentation tomorrow should be an interesting one. And we still have tickets available and you can get them on the website. We've got several other events coming up this month. We've got a fundraiser at Congressional Country Club, which I'm really looking forward to. We've got a gun bash at the end of this month where we're going to be up at North American Rod and Gun Club, raising some money there. We're going to have another event up in Washington County, whether at First Breach or at the Country Club up there. The details will be available on the website. And then we're going to be doing a series of town halls across Garrett and Allegheny. We normally do those in the local library. And again, I will invite all Republican candidates to come out and present their economic development plans. All of these events, I don't ask them. It's not an endorsement or sponsorship. It's a forum for us to demonstrate that the Republican Party is the party of solutions, that we're the party that's united in looking at how we can tackle problems and not just point a finger and blame Democrats. And that's been very well received. And I'm excited to continue doing that. So as we're not sort of having to put ourselves at odds with one another. People can agree with me, they can disagree with me, but when you've got 5 or 6 candidates presenting economic development together, it's hard for the media to ignore that. And I'm hoping that your unaffiliated and your centrist Democrats will see that if they want solutions, they should be looking to Republican candidates.
Awesome. And I see Dwight has popped up on the screen, which means he's got something he wants to say.
I think he's got an event or two to talk about. Dwight, you're
Dwight, you're muted.
That is a rare experience.
He's speechless. I'm glad we're documenting this because I don't know that he's ever been speechless ever before.
I don't know. We can't hear him. Well, I think I can read lips really well. I think what he's saying is join us tomorrow for Pizza and Politics celebrating Women's History Month, where our speaker is somebody whose name I can't remember right now with the title I also can't remember right now, but she's a woman and she's amazing, so you should definitely be there.
Media Research Council, I think, Center, Media Research Center is there. And then on Friday, we're doing a club lunch in Annapolis with former Governor Bob Ehrlich, and we're hoping to have drop by from a number of legislators. So you should get information about that.
Yes.
I'm probably missing some. We also have next week on the 13th and Friday our Washington, Maryland lunch on Capitol Hill. Information about that is also available on our website. Jackie, you're with the YRs. You always have something. So what are we?
We always have something. We have our Annapolis mid-session happy hour going on at Stan and Joe's, and that's going to be on the 12th. And we have a flyer up on our social media and soon on our website. So definitely come out to that. It's open to everybody. It's going to be a ton of fun. And then I said it last time. I'll say it again. Mark your calendars early. The Maryland Young Republicans Christmas Gala is also going to be in Annapolis at the Westin on December 19th. We have a room block. It's going to be great. So, mark it now. Don't plan anything else until after that. And it's going to be a really good time. Probably one of the better ones that we've done in the past several years. And I think that does it for the YRs. So, all right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chris.
For listening. Yep. Thank you, Chris. And hopefully Dwight gets his mic fixed because I don't think this won't contain him for very long. He'll find a way. And we'll be back next week with another guest. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Let's go down to Missoni, where Italian cuisine shines. Let's go